I previously served a pulpit at Chicago Sinai Congregation. And there was a tradition there that happened on every Shabbat before Christmas. That congregation had a piano player, a small choir, and a music director. And from time to time, we had what the senior rabbi liked to call a sermon in song. He got the week off. And the idea was simple. The congregation would get a break from the rabbi talking, and the choir would preach instead. So on the Shabbat closest to Christmas, we would always have one of these sermons in song, and the sanctuary would be surprisingly full on that day, which I think we could say that today too, which is really nice. Although we had a lot of people last week as well, which was also really nice. The choir would begin, and what would they sing? Christmas carols, written by Jews. Yeah, all the way through the sermon and song. So at first glance, this always struck people as a bit odd, maybe even a little bit transgressive. Why would a synagogue on Shabbat sing Christmas music? But not just any Christmas music, Christmas carols written by Jewish composers. And that distinction mattered deeply. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't ironic, it was thoughtful and intentional and Jewish in a uniquely American way. I don't doubt that many of us, unless we grew up in Israel or attended Jewish day school, and my son didn't even know, God Bless America until he was 15 because he was at Jewish day school. All of us probably grew up singing Christmas carols in school. Some of us saw it as unavoidable, and in this era where all elementary school children went to music class, Christmas music dominated the curriculum. At my first elementary school, once November arrived, it was wall-to-wall Christmas songs. There was one other Jew in my grade. At my second school, with more Jews, the music teacher would throw us Jewish kids a bone, and we'd sing one Hanukkah song, usually about candles or spinning dreidels. And then we went right back to Silent Night. While at my last congregation in Utah, the music teacher at the high school he asked me this to my face: why aren't there any good Hanukkah songs? Subtle guy. To which I responded, because all of the Jewish musicians were writing Christmas carols. Not what that guy expected. I was like, nice little touche there. And that raises a question. What does it mean that so many Jews helped write the soundtrack of someone else's holiday? Is this evidence of Jewish creativity or Jewish insecurity? Is it assimilation, accommodation, or something more complex? So tonight I want to argue that this story is not one of Jewish loss, but of Jewish strength. That interfaith and intercultural encounters, when entered thoughtfully, do not weaken Jewish identity, they sharpen it. They force it to articulate itself more clearly, and they make it more durable, not less. And to frame this, I want to turn briefly to the work of a cultural theorist by the name of Homi Bhabha. Please don't read Homi Bhabha, it's impossible. Whose ideas help us understand what's really happening in moments like this. Bhabha writes about hybridity, an idea we probably know from corn in the Midwest, the notion that identity is not formed in isolation but in encounter. Minority cultures, he argues, are not preserved through purity or withdrawal. They are shaped and strengthened through contact with other cultures, especially, and this is the interesting part, when power is unequal, which would be the case here as the minority population. I mean, we can't help it. You walk into pretty much any room in December, and what do you hear, right? Christmas carols, exactly. So, and that indicates cultural power. There's no doubt about it. So, as I said, especially when power is unequal. In those encounters, he says a third space emerges, not assimilation, not resistance, on the other hand, but negotiation. And in that space, identity becomes more self-aware. Rather than disappearing, it often grows stronger, more articulate, and more intentional. So with that lens in mind, let's look at these Christmas carols written by Jews. There's a documentary called Dreaming of a Jewish Christmas. And it's the filmmaker, Larry Weinstein. Can you get more Jewish than Larry Weinstein? So, argues that Jewish songwriters such as Irving Berlin and Mel Torme, I didn't know Mel Torme was Jewish, who would have known, wrote Christmas songs not to express their Jewishness, but to express their Americanness. For that generation of Jews, immigrants or children of immigrants, their Jewishness was unavoidable. Even if they wanted to escape it, American society would not allow them to do so. That's why I named my son Noam Levinsky. He wouldn't have a choice but to face it to some degree. What he does with it is his business, right? But Noam Levinsky, everybody's going to know that that kid is Jewish. Even if they wanted to escape it, American society would not allow them to do so. What was at stake was entry into the white Protestant establishment that held cultural power in American life. And writing Christmas songs was a way into that world. But here's where our cultural theorist Baba complicates the story. This wasn't simple assimilation. Often classical Reform Judaism, which is the history of this congregation, is dismissed as assimilationist. But we should feel empowered by that history. It's a translation. These Jewish composers did not adopt Christian theology or religious imagery. Instead, in a way, they reshaped Christmas itself. So let's take Irving Berlin's White Christmas, perhaps the most famous Christmas song ever written. Made iconic by Bing Crosby, the music is saturated with nostalgia, snowy landscapes, sleigh bells, handwritten cards, and what's striking is what's missing. Jesus, right? No Jesus to be found in there. No church, no nativity. Christmas is presented not as a religious holiday, but as a cultural memory. And this omission is not incidental or accidental. Irving Berlin was born Yisrael Balin. Yisrael Balin was the son of a cantor. His father worked as a kosher butcher and tutored children for their bar mitzvahs. Berlin grew up in the tenements of New York City. There were no glistening treetops and no sleigh bells in the tenements of New York City. So for him, White Christmas isn't a memory, it's imagination. But imagination is powerful. Berlin constructs a version of Christmas that Jews could enter without conversion, without erasure. He helps create a secular American Christmas that feels warm, inclusive, and culturally accessible. So this is hybridity at its work, a Jewish sensibility reshaping the dominant culture from within. There's this sneaky reshaping of dominant culture, ultimately by changing it and turning it from a religious holiday into an American holiday. So we see something similar in Mel Torme's The Christmas Song. Again, we get nostalgia, chestnuts roasting, Jack Frost nipping, carolers singing outside the home. Jews have always been experts in longing for places that we never lived. We love nostalgia for things we never experienced. Only Jews could have nostalgia for wading knee-deep in mud in the shtetl, right? And it's called Fiddler on the Roof. Have you ever, every single small Christian town in America does a production of Fiddler on the Roof. I always find that just amazing. A romanticized shtetl mainly created by people who never experienced it. So these Christmas carols do something similar. They make an imagined past that allows Jews to participate emotionally in American culture without surrendering their religious identity. There's also a practical reality here. Let's call it, Sarah Silverman has a bit where she does this, where she talks about how awesome Christmas is. And then she actually says, okay, what I'm about to say is an absolute stereotype of Jews as money grubbing. And then she just lays that out there as only Sarah Silverman could in her obnoxiousness. And then she says, how could we complain about a spike in retail? Right, so there we go there. And then she also says, essentially, Christmas songs pay well. And there's no doubt about that. Irving Berlin likely earned far more money from White Christmas than he ever would have learned from a song called White Hanukkah. But even that economic fact is part of the story of Jewish survival and adaptation, not its negation. Then there's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This one really makes it more complicated. Written by Robert May, not Larry Weinstein, not Yisrael Balin, Robert May. And this song marks a shift. May came from a later generation. He grew up in a more secular suburban Jewish world. He attended Dartmouth. So that's a very different situation than Irving Berlin growing up in the tenements. He was already assimilated mainly into American life, and yet his song tells not a story of nostalgia, but of exclusion. As Jewish life became more suburban in that generation, ultimately Jews weren't accepted as equals. They were accepted, but they weren't accepted as equals. As someone once said to me in that generation, they would do business with us, but we couldn't be in their country clubs. Right? Unfortunately, that's very true in this town. That's why Oakwood exists, right? Very true in this town. So Rudolph is different. His difference is visible. He's mocked, isolated, and unable to join the games. Only when his difference becomes useful is he accepted. And this is no longer a fantasy of belonging. He already belongs pretty much, supposedly, at Dartmouth. It's a critique of conditional acceptance. So here the interfaith encounter exposes its limits. No matter how assimilated you are, you may still be marked as other. I imagine almost everybody in this room who grew up Jewish felt this one time or another, where you felt in some ways, to use the theoretical term, othered. It's become a verb. Telling that story is itself an assertion of identity. It names the pain of difference rather than pretending it doesn't exist. So taken together, these songs tell a complex Jewish story. They show Jews using interfaith space not to disappear, but to explore belonging, exclusion, both of those, creativity and survival. They demonstrate that Jewish identity does not dissolve in encounter, it becomes more conscious and more complex. For Jews today, the question has shifted. Most of us do not worry about whether we can be American. We're American. That question has largely been answered. Our question is different. How do we continue to love being Jews in a pluralistic world? I'll ask that one again. How do we continue to love being Jews in a pluralistic world? That's a reminder. I should do a sermon about that. Maybe it'll be High Holidays. Yeah, that's a good one to say, especially to the kids, who are really thinking about that. We want them to continue to love Judaism, right? But how do you do that in this world? And the answer, I would argue, is not retreat, it's engagement. Interfaith encounter, when approached with confidence rather than fear, forces us to articulate what makes Judaism meaningful. It challenges us to live Jewishly with intention rather than habit. It deepens identity instead of diluting it. And New Reformed Temple is a place where that work can happen. We're open enough. Whether your path is ritual, justice, music, learning, community, this is a place where Jewish identity is strengthened, not despite the world around us, but through our encounter with it. Shabbat Shalom.